largest angel investor club here in Switzerland. Our mission is to connect startups, innovative startups, with angel investors and helping to make them the investments and for the startups to get a proper amount of money. We are over 500 members. And if you want to join us, it's very easy, 750 francs per year, and you get a lot of excitement and a lot of fun in our community. If you just relate that for a minute here, that you can scan the QR code. So that was a short introduction about SICTIC. What is the goal of today? Now, my personal motivation about syndication is pretty easy. I was faced with many times with problems about syndication in terms of startups were asking me, or people wanted to pool together the money to have a bigger voting rights. So that was the first start. Then I met the guys from LEVA, and they showed me that there's a platform which is easy to use and helps to make syndication. But then started the questions. What exactly is a syndicate? What are the benefits? Could there be pitfalls? Or is there a legal framework for syndication? Because that sounds like investment. And when the word comes for investment, next to is, do I need a license for that? So then what means a syndication? Is there an agreement? Are there structures? Are there standards around? And then finally also, I am in a syndicate or I lead a syndicate. What are roles and responsibilities? And for sure, it's all about risk and return. So we also have to talk about cost structure. What is really means financially wise? Is it expensive to be in a syndicate, or even if you want to run a syndicate, is that expensive? And then some recommendations maybe to finalize that. Do we need to adapt the shareholder agreement because of syndicates, or do we need the articles, the articles, so statutory articles changed? So maybe also Michel or Philippe can give us hints here. So that are the topics we want to cover. The agenda is following. We start with Philippe. He will explain a little bit about LEVA and syndication. So it's not a company presentation. It's really about what you have done and what you have achieved until now, and maybe also why you have done it. Sounds to me sometimes some of the startups having super ideas, and you never know the real origin behind it. And then we go to Michel. He will explain a little bit the legal part and also his experiences with syndication. And then we're going into those questions or the topics I already mentioned, just to go through them and having a fun discussion with you guys. Now, administration-wise, you can put questions in it. So you can't go into the webinar live. So that's one. If you have questions, I'll put them on and try to answer them or direct them to Philippe or to Michel when I think they are the much better person to answer a question, which is mostly the case. So I'm just a practitioner on syndicates. Okay, then starting with Philippe. Yeah, you have some slide prepared, I think so.
Yep. So try to share my screen with you guys. Can anyone see my screen?
Yeah, perfect. Not anymore. We don't hear you. You're muted. Philippe, you're muted. Okay, then we start with Michel. You're going to prepare that. So, Michel, just, I mean, how much of your time you have spent with syndication, and what did it cost you to get into that topic? So, do you learn that at the university in law, syndication as a main topic?
I mean, I think what you just mentioned, Rolf, it's like a practitioner, topic. I think that applies to everyone, right? You cannot, get sophisticated in pooling or syndicates without actually, participating in pools or, setting up the structure of the pool, or even, being the deal manager, pool manager of such a pool. So that applies, 100%. You need to, get involved, and you need to get some experience in order to know how those pools work, and especially also to get, comfortable with it, I think. And I mean, I think, there are like, the first, question, that startups or investors, sometimes ask, who decides, if and how investors, actually get pooled. And we see, like, most times, like, at least the startups that we work with, they have, the request to, to keep the cap table in, somewhat small, and then they request, small ticket investors, to pool. And sometimes they, also take the initiative and suggest, a pooling platform for them. And sometimes they even, initiate the process, with a pooling provider. So the small ticket investors, are properly pooled, and there is no, hassle. But, and sometimes it's also the investors, especially the big ticket investors, to ask, the startup, okay, look, I want to be on the cap table, maybe my co-investors, but all the small ticket investors, you need to, pool, because we don't want, too many people on the cap table. We don't want to, get in touch with too many people. If we have, a new financing round, if we need to get, a waiver, or either it's the right of first refusal or subscription rights. So those are, the primary concerns, of startups or investors, and why they ask, small ticket investors to pool their.
So the two main reasons is, one is that the startup
currently, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
Go for it. No, please.
No, the question, so to summarize, is there's two things. One is the startup wants to have not too many people on the cap table. So they want to pool the smaller tickets into a legal form. And the other one is that maybe VCs in tendency don't like to have too many people on the cap table. So the startups are starting also to have a smaller cap table, just with 5, 6, 7 entries, that they are ready for VC investments in the future.
Exactly. And I mean, the one thing to add is, like, we have a company which has more than 100 shareholders, right, on the cap table. So let's say, it's like super urgent, and you need, a waiver from all those shareholders, right? I mean, it's practically impossible, right, to get that, waiver, signed by them. So you need to basically, provide them notice, and, give them, a notice period, in which they can exercise their subscription rights. So, it also facilitates, the shareholder management of the company. If you can pool, like a large, amount of small ticket investors. So that's also concerns, big ticket investors, sometimes founders have, and why they prefer, to pool those small ticket investors.
That's a reasonable point. I also have seen that, and I'm questioning always, like, is it fair that you are not on a cap table? Do you lose some rights if you're if your shareholder between a Syndicate pooled and directly on the cap table? Is there a difference? I mean, legally?
I mean, it's a good question, right? I mean, you're not the owner of the shares, right? You're only the beneficial owner of the, of basically the shares that, correspond to your ownership in that syndicate. So obviously it is a difference, right? Between, being on the cap table or being in the syndicate. But and also like in terms of, exercising your voting rights. Usually when you're in a syndicate, all votes, are collected, and then, whatever the majority, opinion is of that syndicate, that's how the syndicate will vote. So it is possible, that if you want to vote for something, or you don't want to vote for something, your voice is not going to be heard.
Okay. Now, the legally framework for a syndicate, is there anything in the laws which is called like Chapter 11, paragraph 33, or what's the legal basis behind such a syndicate?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was something, in the law. I mean, obviously there is, Collective Investment Scheme Act, which is, which was drafted, for funds, especially like for investment funds. But those, structures or those choices, usually are not, an option for those, angel syndicates there. And so you need to go, look for, other forms, how you can pool those. And I mean, and currently, in my opinion, there's still like quite a wild west. I really like, that, LEVA is pushing there also a little bit the boundaries, and tries to, educate, the investors, to choose, a Swiss, entity. I mean, it's not an entity, it's a partnership, right? But the Swiss pooling firm. And still, startups or investors, go look for, pooling structures abroad. May that be with Woban, which is a company governed by Kertai, which is the biggest cap table pool manager. So they set up, fiduciary structures. They set up pooling vehicles in the UK. And you can go with Bunch, which is a German pooling provider. So there are like many, service providers who offer that service. And like I don't really, I don't feel that the Swiss, lawmakers, do enough to facilitate, investor pooling. But there is actually, a structure that can be used. And I think, promoting that as well. I think it's also, something that we can do, but not only promote it, but especially educate the people to get comfortable with that.
Okay, that sounds that in Switzerland we haven't a proper legal framework, but you also recommend strongly to use a Swiss legal framework, because if you're going to invest into a pool in the US or in Great Britain or in the British Virgin Islands, I mean, you should know about the legal cases there and about everything there. That's correct. That's your main opinion, that we should have Swiss. I mean, that's one of the things we want to cover, also recommendation wise, that if you do investments in Switzerland, in Swiss companies, please also use a kind of a Swiss structure under Swiss law. Good. Exactly. Now, Philippe, are you ready for your part?
Let's try again.
Let's try again. Okay, so
at least you can hear me. This is a good sign.
Yeah. So we have different forms of syndication. Just to start with that, that's not just one form of syndication. And Philippe will also tell us a little bit about that.
Exactly. First of all, thanks a lot for inviting us to this webinar. Always appreciate to be amongst SICTIC members and discuss this vast majority of wild west in the syndicate landscape, as just Michel pointed out. I don't want to jump into any legal jargon. So as Michel already pointed out, what we offer on LEVA as of today is a syndicate tool that works on a Swiss law system based on a partnership that we can find in the Obligationenrecht. So what we use in the end, Rolf, is effectively in the law, but it's just not labeled as a syndicate. It's labeled as a partnership, which can be used for any kind of things. And we opted in to use it for our first tool that we brought out into market 2 years ago. So as you just said, it should not be also a company presentation about LEVA, but really the syndicate. Nevertheless, give me quickly 60 seconds. Why even we went down this road? For those who know LEVA since a while, we've been on the blockchain when we started the venture in 2017-18. And there we saw this huge potential that this technology has in pooling really not only the funds, but people, resources in general, and this in a fully efficient way, especially only digital. One thing was who was using it back then was cowboys, as still a bit as of today. So we decided to pivot and enter the fully regulated market, which is a fun thing to do if you're like legally profound, but it is definitely a minefield to be looked at. We then went and got a structured proof based on the partnership. And what we then created around this partnership is an ecosystem that if you want to syndicate a deal and you have your investors or your co-investors, your community, we give you the full back office experience. And why? It's simple. Usually, if you invest in private markets, and this is what we discuss here today, there are two ways. You go directly into the cap table, or you go through an investment vehicle usually. These are the two options, and it's always based on the minimum ticket of a startup, how they want their cap table in the end to look at. So this is just quickly an overview of very high level, in a nutshell, what it takes to set up an SPV, manage it also, and then eventually dissolute it. And this is just one SPV. And just imagine SICTIC, I don't know how many
SPV stands for special purpose vehicles. That's the usually term, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In German, Zweckgesellschaft, if you guys maybe heard that term. As SICTIC, I don't know how many investments you did last year, but this is just one. And if you did a lot, this happens. You just need to manage all those kind of SPVs you're putting left and right. You mentioned Bunch, Boban, and all those SPV providers. And yes, somebody needs to manage those entities that are being set up. And usually they are being set up in jurisdictions which you are not familiar with, especially BVI and Jersey. And then the complexity is not only just the setting up, it's really the managing, following up until the dissolution. And Rolf, I guess you know it best, how long it takes to exit a startup. And during that period, you have follow-on rounds. You maybe have people who try to exit. So it's really getting complex. This is why we launched LEVA, is really to fully automate the experience of syndicating with your co-investor, or in your terms is digitizing the lifetime of an investment club, so it is fully regulated and covered and can invest compliantly into the market.
Okay, thank you very much for that short introduction. So when I summarize, that is that LEVA uses a fiduciary agreement, actually. So a person or a legal entity is representing the syndicate members into the cap table. So that's the minimum legal framework. Now, coming on that, it's also like what does it mean really when I'm a syndicate member and my syndication administrator is on the cap table? So Michel, you already said that the syndicate member is just the beneficial owner, so not the one he's entitled on the cap table. That's correct, Michel?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I let Philippe to dive into those technicalities a little bit. I think that makes sense. and then I can, you know, chime in and add anything, you know, that may be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And yeah, Philippe?
In the end, a syndicate, you can just think about just a group, right? And every group has an organization. And depending on how you organize the internal structure of that syndicate, it can be either a POA, you can have beneficial owners. You just can also have a contract with everyone directly in the cap table, and you just call this again a syndicate, and you have internal rules. So it really depends how you build your organization around the syndicate. And with one correction, if I may allow here, Ralph, so we don't use a fiduciary system. We really use the simple partnership as written in the obligation
That's in
code of
German
obligation.
Einfache Gesellschaft.
Einfache Gesellschaft.
Yeah.
So it's not a Treuhandgesellschaft or Treuhandverhältnis. It's really the Einfache Gesellschaft. But you can do also between 6 companies, and you just bundle those up and call this a syndicate. It's really how you want the syndicate to live as an organism in the end, and this defines in the end who enters the cap table, what kind of beneficial rights do you have or not. For example, at LEVA, we fully mirror exactly what theoretically you would own in a cap table. So on our side in the partnership, there is no disadvantage because you exactly mirror exactly as if you would be entered in the cap table.
Yeah. So we're talking about now syndication, as you mentioned, like this legal framework on Einfache Gesellschaft. So that's a representation. We have a syndication manager is on the cap table, and the other are syndicate members. And like they have 100 shares, and we have 10 people with each 10 shares. Huh? So that can be just a contract. It doesn't have to be LEVA only. LEVA just supports a lot of the things from the syndication process. But Michel, there's also a possibility. Is there a standard contract for syndications like this? Because I heard something of that.
I mean, I wish there was. I mean, there is. I mean, there are some, you know, as I think the CISAT association, right? Is it called CISAT? They, you know, they try to, you know, draft, partnership agreement, for syndicates, and invited, you know, a couple of law firms to, revise it.
Yep.
And so, yeah, this is an
that's
agreement,
public available. This kind of a standard contract, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
But like, I think, you know, what Philippe pointed out, that, you know, you need to decide, you know, what structure you would like, right? Do you would like, you know, fiduciary structure? Would you like, you know, a simple partnership, you know, where basically you mirror, you know, the ownerships, or you would like, you know, to have a partnership where basically the partnership, you know, owns all the shares, and actually, you know, everyone, you know, of the partnership is then on the cap table. So I think, you know, depending on, you know, what you would like, you know, your syndicate to be, then you need to basically, you know, decide, you know, how to draft these documents. And I think that's the biggest challenge, right? And for, you know, investors who, you know, are not working with a service provider, because sometimes, you know, investors who are not, you know, experienced in that, you know, are maybe a little bit lost. So that's why, you know, it's...
Or you need a lawyer.
Or you need a lawyer, yeah. And that's why, you know, it also makes sense to, you know, work with a service provider, because they have a concept and they make sure, you know, that you're going to stick to that concept, you know, with the whatever syndicate agreement or partnership agreement or whatever it is called, you know, is drafted. And also, you know, the modus operandi, then, you know, how the syndicate works is also compliant, you know, with what is written in that syndicate agreement.
So Philippe, you have a standard contract. So when I join a syndicate on the platform, I have to sign up that terms of conditions, it's called, or terms of syndicate, and that is used for all your syndicates over the whole. All your users are using that. Is that correct?
Well, it depends on how the deal is structured, and in the end, how many people are there, what the underlying asset it is. And we have in the back more than 9,000 notes on how the partnership agreement changes based on the parameters that you put in on the partnership level. And this will also be the case if you use a lawyer. He will just ask you in the end, where do you want to invest? Where do you come from? And I will give you then 2 or 3 possibilities. But we said, for us, syndication equally needs to be at the beginning pooling. Why? Because we ourselves are a startup, if we're still allowed to call us this with the startup label. And we saw that if we would not have used syndicates, and real syndicates mean hard pooling, then we would have had over 50 people on the cap table. Our cap table has 8 people in it. And this is why because we exactly used obviously our own tool to really just have what we need to have from the syndicate. And you can still invite all the syndicate members if you want. You can have a separate session with them, so you don't exclude them. It really depends in the end on the investee, on how he or she wants to live with a shareholder that is in the end the syndicate.
But for the most of the syndicates, you have a standard contract, but you could, like, if you are a big customer of you can like making add-ons or adaptations or changes to that, and but we don't want to talk about that. We want to see that syndication works in Switzerland under Swiss law with a service provider or one of them in a very formal way, very easy. And I think that's an important message to everybody, that syndication is complex when you don't know what to do. If you're going to a service provider, I mean, that's one of the advantages. You also pay for that one. It's not free, but then you get like a standard contract, which has also a good experience within the community. So, guys, I mean, we have talked about what the syndication is, a pooling of people for an investment. We have specific forms. It could also be a GmbH or AG, which is more complex to handle. And if you're going to this service provider like LEVA, they're using einfache Gesellschaft. So benefits we already heard: keep the cap table clean, making you as a startup VC ready. Are they? And also you elaborate, Michel, that I mean, if you are like a lazy investor and you are in syndicate, I mean, everybody does, the job is done for you because the syndication administration or a manager is going to do all the stuff he needs to do for the general assemblies or voting things. What are other benefits you have seen for syndication? Maybe Philippe, what have you experienced in addition to that, what I have told you, or what we have already discussed?
You pointed out the main things. One is definitely the coordination within a syndicate, which again, you can do fully non-digital, but the more collaborative tools you use, the more effective and more efficient your syndicate is. Then also, obviously, there's no such thing as free lunch, as I always was taught, and somebody needs to do the job. On our side, we try to give a software to you that takes away almost everything, but you can also handle it completely manually on your site. And then I also understand why some people don't do it for free. So this, I guess, definitely are the two most. And then it's convincing also the startup in accepting a syndicate. Because the bigger the syndicate grows, the bigger the voting power becomes.
That was the point I wanted to also go on it. I mean, if you're like having 10 shares and you're on the cap table with 0.001%, or you're in syndicate, for sure, you still have the voting power. It stays, but within the group, you're bigger. Actually, that's also the reason why you do sometimes syndications, also in the large private equity world, because you pool the equity or your power together, that you got the majority of the company, and then you're bound next to a shareholder agreement also in that structure. So that's just also an explanation. So pooling syndication exists in many years, even for big projects, infrastructure projects. So could there be pitfall? We heard one pitfall is please keep in the Swiss legislation room. Are there other pitfalls? I mean, I could imagine that the syndication manager or administrator is a very important person. So what happens if that person does not work? He doesn't respond to the emails of the startup. Well, that must be an organization or a person who is trusted. That's for sure. But what can happen if he doesn't work? Can you exchange him easily? Is that or is that difficult or impossible?
So here really it really lies down on how you build the structure of the syndicate itself. If you have rules that already predefine when he or she will be replaced, then it's easy on a syndicate level. But then Michel comes as a lawyer of a startup, says, I have a shareholder agreement that if you change a shareholder, then I have maybe some follow-on actions. So you maybe need to take care also of a few provisions in the shareholder agreement.
I think we're going to that point. That's an important point also to the easy of use of a syndicate, or also in LEVA is also that you have maybe some clauses in the shareholder agreement who helps kind of making more benefits. But the biggest pitfalls are, as I understand, that the syndication manager is not working properly, but you can exchange him. So it's also a voting between the syndicate members, and I have seen on LEVA a new function, change syndication manager. So it's even now digital supported. That's fun. I don't think so. You have to done that many times, right?
No, fortunately not. Because it should be a trusted party, right? The person that leads the partnership, that is the so-called leader of the syndicate, is a trusted party for both, right? It's the person in between. So should not happen, but can happen.
What are then the roles and responsibility for such a syndication lead? So we always use syndication manager, syndication administrator. Sometimes you hear the word lead investor or lead deal manager, as it's called in syndicate. I mean, they're synonyms actually, but what's the responsibility of that person? Or it can be a person or a legal entity. Who leads that? Philippe, what's the responsibility?
So,
or main responsibility
in our concept, so he or she is the shareholder of the company. So in the end, he or she needs to take care of the shareholder obligation. And if we put it frankly legally, what the sole shareholder obligation is, it's just subscribing the subscription form, and that's it.
That's the main obligation, yes.
That's it. you subscribe the subscription form, you are shareholder, and you don't have to do anything anymore. But now you have the whole syndicate in the back. And there is obviously, you need to take care of general assembly, voting powers, right? You just play down the whole voting system. You ask the syndicate members on how to vote. You take a certain decision, maybe on behalf of the syndicate. It's just really making sure that you still are the shareholder of the company, and you have a good relationship with your syndicate members.
And are you liable as syndication? Or I'm now in a syndicate as a member, and now my syndication manager does not work properly, so he did not respond to the startup, and we missed the general assembly because of this guy. Can I do something against him? Can I sue him? Or
again, organization-wise, obviously, if you put in rules within the syndicate that you can go after him, then why not? But again, the sole real purpose of a shareholder is subscribing the subscription form. And this is why you should, if you use syndicates, I'm not saying you need to use LEVA or the likes, but you should use an infrastructure that helps you with all those complexities around the deal. You have tax forms to fill out. You need to go for the voting. You need to play
taxes. That's an important topic.
So there's a lot of things you need to take care, and you just don't have time for this, and you also not the knowledge. So the best is you really attach yourself to an infrastructure or a service provider that helps you with all this vast majority, because the regulations around syndication is just not to be made fun of. You really need to take care, as it is really a thin line that you are walking.
Maybe we're talking about mitigation and risks on that. So coming back, I mean, that was also something Michel said about voting. Can you explain me how voting rights are executed within such a syndicate? So we have this 100 shares, every 10 people with 10 shares. Now comes the General Assembly, and the syndicate has to vote. So you mentioned something like majority. Can you explain that a little bit with an example, Michel?
Sure.
Michel? Yeah.
I mean, like the way the voting works is described in that syndicate agreement, right? But like I would say per default, right? It's like whatever, the majority of the, shares held by the syndicate members, vote for will be, will need to be accepted by all the other, syndicate members. So the syndicate, votes yes or no, and not like, okay, 10 shares yes, 10 shares no, and 10 shares, abstention. Exactly. So that is like super important, right? Especially if you're a startup and you allow, a syndicate, to participate, in your financing round, you need to make sure that the, syndicate agreement is set up in a way where, the syndicate, votes, yes or no, and not like, like every share held or owned by the syndicate members, in a different way.
Can have a different opinion. So that means finally the majority, when syndicate of 60 is the majority, the whole syndicate, so the 100 syndicates vote for yes. Is that correct? And what happens if like I have just 10 shares, as the same situation, 10 people with 10 shares. Now, 9 of them were not responding to the mails of the syndication manager, and assuming the 10 shares belonging to the syndication manager. And what is then the voting power? Actually, I never had that situation, but it's interesting to hear, because it's like this we said about pitfalls or specialities of syndication. So what happens? What's the voting? Can I go with my 10 shares and then it's 100%?
Yeah. I mean, usually, right, it's the majority of the votes that are cast, right? So whoever doesn't cast, its vote is not counted,
Okay.
in that equation.
So actually the same rules as you have in a General Assembly. Huh?
Yeah. So if
you agree on that, Philippe?
Yeah, well, it depends what you write in the partnership agreement.
But in the normal terms in LEVA, it's like that. Huh?
It's like that, obviously. The deal manager gives information, and if people don't reply, obviously, you cannot force people to reply.
Yes, and that's very important too. I mean, it's good for the startup that they have a voting on that, and that the syndicate always votes. The disadvantage is a little bit that you can, as a single shareholder, you could be or a syndicate member, you're going to be overruled. Is there, now, I'm just, Michel, you're a lawyer, you don't have to say yes or no, but if we would have agreement with a startup, not in an informal way, that I can count all that I can go in with my, now we have this situation of these 10 members and 100 shares, and then I'm going to vote like 50 yes, 20 abstain, 30 against it. It's like the Stimmrechtsvertreter, this voting proxy you have normally. I mean, legally, I know it's not possible because it's only one shareholder, and one shareholder cannot have many arms to vote. But if the startup would accepting it, or the other investors would accept it, it's possible.
I mean, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So there
Philippe
are jurisdictions.
is also a lawyer.
No, I'm working at the law in a company. I'm not allowed to call myself like this, but
okay.
There are jurisdictions that allow split voting. There is a huge discussion in Switzerland on how to bring split voting, right? So there's this, you need to put in the statutories that you somehow have.
You can put it in the statutories.
But Michel, you're definitely more on that part. If this is really something that is used in practice, or is more a theory than a game. And if you would allow split voting, then Ralph, you could theoretically do exactly what you just said.
So that's maybe one of the points if you're with your syndicate, you have to agree on that, if that's possible. But Michel, you have a certain opinion on split voting?
I mean, I mean, I think, you know, the point of, you know, pooling investors is to facilitate the shareholder management, right? And if you allow split voting, it kind of like defeats the purpose of the, you know, of pooling the investors. So I think, you know, when you go through the hassle of pooling the investors, then it also makes sense, you know, not to allow split voting. I mean, that being said, you know, it doesn't make it impossible to, you know, implement that. And obviously contractually you can always do that. The question is more like, okay, like, you know, what kind of, you know, measures do you need to take to also make it, you know, legally binding on a corporate level? That's what Philippe mentioned, you know. Yeah, what do you have to amend?
It's not officially by law possible, split voting, but that's what I said. If everybody agrees in the investment or in the cap table that it's possible by shareholder agreement or even in the articles of the statutory articles, then it's possible. But for sure, a shareholder could claim and sue and saying, okay, those decisions were not properly done. That's possible all the time. It had never happened to me. So in general, in the startup world, I have seen we are very comfort and very near to the startup. And I would say like 99% we vote as the board has requested to vote. So if there's a situation where you're not satisfied with the startup or the situation is very bad, then even a shareholder agreement or such split voting will help you to calm down the situation. It's a shitty situation. Companies goes bankrupt. You lose money. People and emotions going high. So that's also my experience. Okay, now there's another really topic, and also one of the questions was what such a structure. Actually, we have seen here four questions. First one was like, or you take the second one. Can you elaborate again on the reason why LEVA doesn't use terminology of syndicate but partnership? Philippe.
So partnership is just the legal word that we have, the einfache Gesellschaft, or simple partnership. But when we go out there and we talk to people abroad, right, a simple partnership, they just look at us and say, what is it? And if we can use a terminology that everybody knows, syndicate, because it's one of the most ancient ways to invest, then everybody at least understands what is happening. People come together, resources come together, money comes together, and it's being sent somewhere.
Okay, that's good question, answer on that. I hope Raphael did get all within. Then another legal question before we go into that tax issue. It's a simple partnership and not a fiduciary agreement. Who exercises the representation of all the shareholders?
So on our side, it's the leader of the partnership. So he is member of the partnership itself and represents the partnership outside.
He's also the person on the cap table. Officially
can be him, but also as Michel pointed out, can be also the whole
can
syndicate.
Be also syndicate ABCD.
Okay. It depends what the purpose is. You want to pool or not.
Good. So we coming to the tax question. That was what such a structure has for tax consequences for the partner and share syndicate members. So who wants to answer the taxation thing? Because we missed our tax lawyer here in our club, so we have to tax it. I mean, Philippe, you will always ask who's going to pay the taxes, or who's going to put how you have solved that in LEVA. And then we ask Michel if that is, on his opinion, I mean, you're not a tax lawyer, is it properly done?
Yes, so we took the approach on going for tax rulings if our customers ask for it. So we got tax rulings in 2 different cantons, for example, where they explicitly ask to have those questions exactly answered. And what we made sure with the syndicate or partnership we provide as of today is that it's a look-through structure. So on syndicate level or on partnership level, there's no tax, and you're just being taxed as if you would have invested directly.
So that
Very
means that the
important.
syndicate member has to fill in his tax statement, I am the owner of these 10 shares, huh?
So the deal manager...
do you provide him with a tax statement, or what do you do?
Exactly. So you just put it out. Also there, either you call a tax lawyer or you use just an infrastructure like LEVA, where you just know all those side hustles you are being taken care of, and you just need to hand in, and that's it. So yes, we provide the tax forms that make clear that the leader of the partnership is not the owner of the shares, but you have the syndicate co-investors that are theoretically the UBOs, and everybody gets his or her tax form.
Okay, perfect. So that's also a relief for the syndication manager that doesn't have to pay wealth taxes on because he's not the beneficial owner. So this look-through structure, this is a very important thing. So from a point of view of tax, you are the person as a syndicate member, you are the person who has to make the tax statement for your tax authorities. I think
very important for an exit.
Yes, we answered that question properly. Now we're going to another question. What are the legal entitlements rights for my capital in a case of a default of the syndicate provider? That's an interesting one. That's one we also could say, like, what are pitfalls or risks with the syndicate? So now we have this einfache Gesellschaft, this simple partnership with the name SICTIC Syndicate for LEVA, and then goes bankrupt. This is a very unusual situation, but maybe we take a private person who goes into private how to say that, private bankruptcy, and what happens then exactly?
Maybe Philip, maybe I can start off, and then I'm just gonna hand it over to you, okay? And I think it's super important to first to distinguish between the deal or pool manager or the guy who's holds the shares on behalf of the syndicate members, and then the service provider who actually provides the infrastructure that gives you the user experience that you need and to facilitate the management of the syndicate. So generally, if the service provider goes bankrupt, then it doesn't affect ownership of the shares, right? Because those shares are usually held by the whoever holds the shares on behalf of the syndicate members, right? And I mean, it depends on the service provider, right? But then if the person who holds the shares goes bankrupt or dies, if it's a natural person, obviously it's an issue. And I think there it's important that you can claim that those shares are beneficially or like primarily like owned by the syndicate members, that like any bankruptcy court does not claim those assets then. And now over to you, Philippe.
Philippe, had you have once this case until now?
No, so we're still here. So this case
not
so the service provider did not.
The service provider, that's another question. But if this person is going going to die or is private bankruptcy, what happens actually?
So all those rules are smart contracted in the partnership agreement itself. So we took already care of all those steps, so you know exactly what happens if somebody dies, if somebody has a Beistand and cannot act itself anymore, if it goes bankrupt. And it's, as Michel pointed out, if you don't take care of this, and there are so many rulings out there about court decisions, right? Then you're this is a huge pitfall. So you really need to make sure that in case something happens, the rules are clear from the beginning, so that you really also can claim those.
But those rules are implemented that it's always transferred. The syndicate can appoint a new syndicate administrator or owner, goes on the cap table. And the only difficulty, if you have physical shares, and those physical shares are in the treasury or the treasury of that person, then you have a problem, because that's but most of the startups have electronic shares, digital shares, so that's more easy to transfer anyway. Okay,
absolutely. And if I may add quickly to the service provider, Michel, the case of the company Assure in the US exactly showed the difference, right? By using Bunch, Boba, and the like, you go into a lump sum risk, because it's those company taking care of your SPVs. It's those company managing those SPVs. And Assure in the US was the biggest SPV provider in the world. And last year in November, they stated, we're very sorry, we need to close the business by the end of the year. So please, within 1 month, take your SPVs somewhere, but we cannot handle it anymore. And this is why LEVA choose to not be part of any contract of the partnership. We are your back office. So theoretically, if we should cease to exist, then those partnership and syndicates still live on. So it's very careful. You need to be very specific about this, because you might end up in going in a lump sum risk using a certain service providers.
Good. Okay. Now we have other questions, maybe an interesting one. So all questions are very interesting. But if in an exit event where the syndicate itself also then has subsequently gets liquidated, how do the members of the syndicate get taxed once or twice? Oh, interesting. Well, first of all, now happens the exit. You can then vote on how many exits you have experienced in your life. There's not so many, but if that happens, then it's joy first. Huh? But how does really happens? Actually, that's especially on your platform, Philippe. It's a good point, because the money and all the signatures you need to do the exit is then done by the syndication manager or deal manager, and then the money flows actually to LEVA, correctly?
Correctly, we take care of the exit. So maybe to answer this question, according to our tax rulings, right, it's being taxed once, and as is a tax rule structure. And we take care of all the calculation. If there are withholding taxes to be held back, to distribution of the funds itself. So this is really if the syndicate exits. But the nice thing about simple partnerships or any kind of structure, you can exit also within the syndicate. So you don't need to wait until the whole syndicate structure exits. You can also exit within the syndicate. And this makes a syndicate a very nice tool to also not stick 7 years or 8 years or 10 years with a startup, but you can also do exits within the syndicate to the same rules. Obviously, if you find a buyer, but this is maybe the two advantages on using also a syndicate.
Okay, the answer, so short, is really like just once taxed, and payout is then subsequently done by the syndication manager, and you're on a service provider. Hopefully it's all digital way. And the other point is more what you said, and we didn't say that yet, is if you want to have change in a syndicate. So one person wants to go out and sell the shares to the other syndicate members. That's possible without touching the shareholder agreement. I think that's also an important point. So like, not that we have a secondary market in that case, but it's easier to transfer shares within a syndicate. And because the shareholder agreement normally says that when you want to sell the shares, you have to offer them to all other shareholders. Now, this can be really an advantage and not a disadvantage. And also, I mean, if somebody new joins the syndicate, he can take over those shares. So it's also like, if you want to have a new syndicate member, to give him the shares who's leaving, that's also possible. I think that's a good point. I almost forget that one as a positive thing, because like exiting is a difficult thing anyway with private investments. Okay, now maybe an easy question for you, Philippe. That's how does LEVA deal with KYC? Does they deal with KYC? Now the problem is, what is KYC? Know your customer rules. But just short on that, Philippe.
Yeah.
How you deal with that?
Obviously, we take care of the compliance and KYC for the deal manager, so for the syndicate leader and the syndicate itself. And everybody that used already LEVA knows also that we definitely take this very seriously because it's a white hat business that we're creating here. So yeah, KYC fully digitally for natural person. For legal entities, we do digital manual process.
Okay, so we run out of time, unfortunately. So let's see if we have are the carry costs. Oh yes, costs of a syndicate. So how you deal with that with costs? We said there's no free lunch, and for sure LEVA has also to survive. So what's the cost structure you do shortly, and or what the possibility as syndication manager for the cost structure?
So on our side, the syndicate leader can define the cost structure within the syndicate upon to his purpose. So he can have a structuring cost, a management cost, or he just wins with the syndicate and adds a performance cost fee to it. On LEVA, it's pretty easy. We have a 1% transaction fee, a minimum of 1,000, a maximum of 10,000, no matter how big the deal is, lifetime. So for the next 7-8 years, in a deal-by-deal structure.
Okay, so 1% to LEVA, and then the rest, whatever the syndication manager wants to do. So we're coming to an end. Sorry that there's so many questions. We can't answer them. And maybe we have to make a syndication part 2 on that. Many thanks you too, Michel, and also Philippe. Julia, can you show up the next events coming up for SICTIC on the slide basis, please? And in between that, I would just want to tell you, syndication is a really nice thing. So don't be like recalcitrant on when syndication come up, especially for our SICTIC members. I can promise syndication will be heavily used in the future, especially to have the opportunity to collect smaller tickets under 20K. We want to offer that through a syndication. We are in process to do that. The project is started, and we have some hurdles, like also that everything is legally correct, but that comes soon from SICTIC. Now the next SICTIC events are the Angel Lunch in Lugano, then new investor onboarding with me, then our always like very cool EMD event in Lausanne together with EMD people. So mostly of the 150 participants are from IMD, which is always fun to talk with them. It's very cool people there. Then again, 28th, an angel investor lunch in Zurich, hosted by me. And then we have the Investor Academy in Geneva. This is the masterclass about the Angel Handbook. So for all our friends in the Romandie, that's also a super cool event, which Bolko and I are doing. So happy to see you soon in one of our events. And just to say, their next FinTech Investor Day is also coming on the 12th October. Also a big event. Please mark that on your calendars. And again, Michel, super happy. Thanks to you and Philippe.
Thanks so much,
who helped me
Ralph.
on this webinar. It's always good to have experts left and right, wingmans, who can cover the topics better than I do. And yes, happy syndication. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Happy syndication. Happy lunch.
Bye-bye.